Welcome everyone to our call today titled Multi-Sector Partner Engagement in the Active Transportation Arena, a Facilitated Discussion. This 90-minute interactive teleconference is brought to you by the Active Transportation Resource Center, or ATRC, which is funded by Caltrans' Active Transportation Program. We've been looking forward to this opportunity to dig deeper into the complex and dynamic topic of multi-sector partnership development within the field of active transportation. My name is Mary Strode. I work in the California Department of Public Health Active Transportation Safety Program. Our program has been part of the Active Transportation Resource Center since October 2015. I'm joined by my teammates Jane Kemp, Kristen Hockham, and Victoria Custodio. We provide technical assistance and training statewide to Caltrans' Active Transportation Program, non-infrastructure projects, and other stakeholders who are working in the active transportation field. You can find out more about ATRC services and educational tools by accessing the ATRC website at www.caatpresources.org. The purpose of today's call is threefold. One, to provide an opportunity for experts in cross-sector collaboration to respond to 7 specific questions on cross-sector partner engagement. 2, to facilitate open dialogue between participants and panelists regarding how to enhance or increase partnerships to benefit active transportation project planning, implementation, evaluation, and to promote program sustainability. And 3, to share specific cross-sector partnership building examples, best practices, mechanisms, and/or tools. We have 2 primary learning objectives for today's call. Participants will identify at least one successful or promising cross-sector partnership building strategy that they have not implemented before, and 2, to identify at least one tool or mechanism that has been used to build or sustain cross-sector partnerships. We're fortunate to have 4 panelists that work in the active transportation field at the local, regional, and state levels. Each panelist possesses uniquely different expertise and perspectives in the area of multi-sector partnering. Our panelists today are Meredith Wray from the California Department of Public Health, Health and All Policies Task Force, Tamika Butler from the LA Bicycle Coalition, Ry Berg from the Southern California Association of Governments, and Marcy Gutierrez from the Riverside University Health System Public Health Department. I'll have each panelist introduce themselves in a few moments. The panelists will share prepared responses to approximately 7 questions received in advance from the field. Participants on the call will be able to make comments or ask follow-up questions of the panel as we go through each question. After the 7 questions have been addressed, if time permits, the panel will be able to entertain other impromptu questions that participants may have on the topic of cross-sector partnership development and engagement. So now for a little bit of housekeeping. We need to minimize background noise so that all can hear well. So we're placing you in listen-only mode. Please don't place your phone on hold. If you want to ask a question of the panel or make a comment, please wait for the instructions as we will be setting aside certain times for participant comment. Please be sensitive to time constraints if you do speak. And lastly, a teleconference evaluation survey link will be emailed to everyone after the teleconference. Since this is a relatively new format for our team, we'd really appreciate honest feedback from all participants. So thanks very much in advance. Following the call, we're going to post a recording on the ATRC website. If you have a question for the panel that was not addressed during today's call, please contact me or anyone on our team afterwards, and we'll do our best to provide you with a response. Okay, so now we're going to allow our 4 panelists to briefly introduce themselves and describe their backgrounds. Again, we're so grateful for their willingness to be here today and to share their thoughts and expertise with us. So we're going to go ahead and start with Tamika. Tamika, if you could share a little bit about your background.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tamika Butler, and I'm the Executive Director of an organization called the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition. And we do exactly what it sounds like we do. We are a county-wide bicycle advocacy and education organization. So, going to City Hall and the 88 cities and unincorporated areas, asking for more bike lanes, doing education classes so that folks feel safe when they're riding. And then we're also a membership-based organization with over 10,000 supporters and members, and we do a lot of fun events for them. Myself personally, I come to this work as a bit of an outsider. I was trained as a lawyer. I practiced plaintiff side employment law at a legal aid office, and somehow have ended up at the Bike Coalition and have never been happier. So I know I'll talk more later on, but I'm very happy to be with everyone today.
Thank you, Tamika. Now we'll have Meredith introduce herself.
That's right. Good morning, everyone. This is Meredith Wray. I work with the California Department of Public Health in our Office of Health Equity, and I staff the California Health and All Policies Task Force. So for those who don't know, that the Health and All Policies Task Force at the state, we bring together 22 different department agencies and offices, including departments such as the Environmental Protection Agency, Food and Ag, Department of Education, Labor, Workforce, et cetera. And it's really my job and the job of my team to be the backbone staff, the conveners, the facilitators. I also joke the matchmakers. So we have a number of different topical areas that we work on, including active transportation. And our role is really as those conveners and those cross-sector collaborators. So looking forward to this conversation and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Meredith. Now, if Rye, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. This is Rye Berg. I'm a Senior Regional Planner at the Southern California Association of Governments, also known as SCAG. I work in the Active Transportation and Special Programs Division. One of those special programs is public health, so I lead our public health analysis for our long-range planning here. I also work on a number of active transportation projects, including our safety and encouragement campaign for active transportation called Go Human, and then I oversee a number of data projects related to bicycle and pedestrian data. I actually come from a bit of an advocacy background similar to what Tamika is doing now, so have had a lot of experience working with a lot of different groups, including public health departments and others. So very happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rye. And Marcy, if you could also introduce yourself, please.
Yes, hi. Good morning. My name is Marcy Rosenberg Gutierrez. I am a program coordinator for the Injury Prevention Services branch at the Riverside University Health System Public Health, formerly the Department of Public Health, Riverside County. And I think I'm one of the actual owner-operator person here on the panel today, because we have 4 ATP non-infrastructure safe routes to school projects, and we also have Office of Traffic Safety, Pedestrian Safety grants that complement those projects. So I've been working with Riverside County Public Health for about 27 years and Safe Routes to School program since 2010. And basically we work with a lot of stakeholders in our Safe Routes to School programs and Office of Traffic Safety. We work with school districts, transportation, traffic engineers, law enforcement, bike advocates, nonprofit agencies, and we basically we're implementing the 5 E's in Riverside County, and we do that by doing walk audits, walkability workshops, walk and bike to school days, active transportation projects like what we actually try to do is train ambassadors in the communities to implement these projects as an ongoing basis. So bike skills and repair workshops. We actually, I think we're unique in some ways that we have enforcement contracts. So we actually contract with law enforcement to do some of our enforcement activities. So we also have an active transportation network, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But I'm happy to be here, and thank you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for those introductions. Now we're going to jump right into the 7 questions. We're going to go one question at a time and take roughly 10 minutes per question, give or take. So the panelists will share their responses first, and then we'll unmute the phone lines and welcome any brief questions or comments from participants on that specific question. Then we'll go on to the next question. So the 7 questions will provide the basic structure for today's call. And as I mentioned, time permitting, at the end of the call, we will open up to see who all has other types of questions or comments for the panel. So the first question, what is one example of an effective strategy you have used to build and maintain relationships with a partner from a different sector, given that there are likely perspective, language, and/or cultural differences? So our first panelist to respond will be Tamika, followed by Meredith, then Rai, and then Marcy. So go ahead, Tamika. Thank you.
Great. So, you know, I think for me, the things I always try to do when I'm trying to be someone who's getting work done and build and maintain relationships with partners, my 4 quick things are I like to show up, I like to be consistent, I like to be an ally, and I like to build trust. And by show up, I mean oftentimes when you're trying to partner with folks, I think particularly in low-income communities of color, you know, those communities are so used to folks just showing up when they need something, but not really making that investment. And so by show up and be consistent, are you a person who, in building that relationship and building that partnership, whether it's with an individual or a group, are you just showing up when you need something, and are you not being consistent? Or are you consistently being there and being a part of the conversation? And while you're doing that, you're building trust, and you're showing up as someone who's super reliable. I think the piece about being an ally is really important, because I think in today's world, we're so used to being an ally, meaning that we just change our profile picture on Facebook and now we're an ally. But being an ally is actually an action. You actually have to do something. And part of that is showing up and building that trust, but part of that is also knowing when do you speak up, when do you make sure that some of those partnerships you're trying to build, they might not have the same privilege and access you have. So when do you invite them into the room so that you don't have to speak for them, but that they're actually getting invited to those meetings? When do you make sure that the time of meeting gets changed so that they can attend? And what are you actually doing in those situations? And the example I always give is the Bike Coalition. You know, there's a lot of meetings I show up to, and for months we may never talk about bikes. And that has to be okay, because when it finally is time to talk about bikes, I've built enough trust, I've been consistent, I've showed up, I've shown myself as an ally, that the folks in the room know that I'm not just doing this because it's in my self-interest, but I'm doing it because I think it helps the greater good. I'm able to talk to the other things we've talked about, whether it's housing, whether it's health, you know, whether it's public safety. They know that I've invested time in building that partnership, and so I've been okay showing up, being consistent, being an ally, and building trust. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks very much, Tamika. I think Meredith now will go.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mary and Tamika. And actually, a lot of my responses build off of Tamika's and are really nicely in alignment. You know, and I think one thing is my work here at the state, our stakeholders are usually other actually departments, agencies, and offices. So, and it's interesting because the same principles apply when you're working with another department who you've never worked with, the same way as when you're working with a community you've never worked with. So we have kind of 3 pillars that we talked about when we're building new relationships. And Tamika touched on a number of these, but trust, mutuality, and respect, or excuse me, reciprocity. And in terms of trust, I think Tamika also touched on this, but building trust is essential for any good relationship. So when we go into the room, we always assume good intentions. I think most people come to this work, and especially at government, we don't get into this work to make a lot of money. We get into this work because many of us actually believe in the common good that we're serving. So assuming those good intentions, I think is really important. We also practice humility. So while I sit at the Department of Public Health and would say I have health expertise, I am not an expert in many of the topics we work on, including active transportation. I don't have training in transportation. I've learned a lot through doing this job over the years, but we're not the subject matter experts, and really acknowledging that and respecting the expertise that others have, I think is really important. And then also, I think this is consistent with Tamika's comment about being consistent, but really honoring the commitments we make and making sure that we follow through. I think there's nothing can build a relationship stronger than when you actually follow up, and nothing can hurt a relationship more when you actually aren't consistent and don't show up to that next meeting or that next deliverable. In terms of mutuality, and it builds off of the same good intentions, but we oftentimes start our conversations, I think, similar to Tamika, not about thinking about what's in it for us in terms of from a health perspective, but really listening first and understanding what other departments and agencies' priorities are, what their goals are, what is it that is the thing that they're caring about most, and then working to identify common values, goals, or themes that we could support together. So I think there's a lot of different ways to do that, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the later questions. And then finally, under reciprocity, at the state level, we don't have money that we're giving to our partner agencies to do this work. And so one way to build a relationship is really what we have to offer is our staff time and our personal and our staff resources. So, a great way to start to build a relationship is to actually offer to help. And then we're also very careful about making sure that we're giving credit where credit is due. So, oftentimes we'll try to take the back seat and lift up what our partners are doing to make sure that they're getting credit. And, yeah. So I'll leave it there and then pass it back to Mary.
Great. Thanks, Meredith. Rye, would you like to share your comments on this question?
Great. I agree with a lot of what's already been said, especially the reciprocity discussion. I think what is very helpful from our agency's perspective is not only when we host a working group and we ask a lot of people to attend, but then when we go out and we attend the working groups of others. So just as a quick example, the Public Health Alliance of Southern California, they coordinate all the health departments for our region. We sit on 2 or 3 of their different working groups and try to provide input on their products, as well as asking them to come to SCAG and provide input onto our planning efforts. And I think it's just a great way to you can get a lot deeper into the projects and the topics that you're interested in that way. But it's just a good way to keep that communication going, and often the conversations that start in one will kind of bleed over into another. So that's very helpful. The second thing I wanted to just talk about, and I think this kind of builds off a little bit of that mutuality that Meredith was talking about, was learning the language of the folks that you're trying to work with. I come from a linguistic anthropology background, so this is kind of near and dear to my heart, but making sure that, and this takes time, making sure that you are bringing the facts and the arguments that are actually going to make a difference for the folks that you're working with. So engineers versus maybe the Chamber of Commerce are going to have 2 completely different languages, and for one you may need to talk about safety and the benefits of that, of your project from that point of view, whereas when you're talking the other, you may need to actually talk about money and how the project is going to save their members money. And I think one thing that's always helpful from this is if you can have a champion in that arena that can kind of speak on your behalf, that knows the language and can really get your foot in the door for you. So I'll end it there.
Thanks very much, Rye. So Marcy, now's your chance to share your comments on this first question.
Yes, thank you. And I've been asked to focus a little bit on law enforcement, since that sometimes seems to be a little bit of a challenge to connect with law enforcement, and we have had a lot of good experiences and a lot of lessons learned with trying to involve law enforcement into our Safe Routes to School and active transportation projects. So enforcement being one of the 5 E's, of course, we focus a lot. And I did mention that we did actually write them into our contract for the ATP Cycle 1 because we heard that from law enforcement when we met with them. So you know, they were like Rye said, you know, the health is good, safety is good, but money is really good. So I think they really appreciated that, and that was a beginning to the partnership where, you know, we can actually do a sit down. So I think connecting with law enforcement is really the first step, and how do you do that? So connecting with the right person is very important. When you're calling in, you may not know exactly who to talk to. Sometimes we start with just the main line, but a lot of times the police, it depends on if it's a city police department or perhaps a county sheriff. They might actually have a traffic bureau and a department that deals specifically with traffic and, of course, traffic safety. So if you can try to talk to someone with traffic, that's great. Sometimes it's more geographical. They just have officers assigned to certain areas and locations. And in that case, you'd want to focus, of course, on the officers that are targeting your area, whatever you're looking, you know, your target. And another person you may want to speak to is the school resource officer. They are usually assigned to the high schools and maybe middle schools, very rarely to the elementary, but every elementary school usually has an SRO, school resource officer, that they have on speed dial. So that's going to be the one that they talk to. We like to get their cell phone numbers. They usually give that up pretty readily. But the real good thing about connecting is finding out how it is that they communicate. So how do you want us to reach you? Asking those questions. So you know, we can email all day long and get nothing back. So we realize, I wonder if there's a better way to reach them. Requesting local data is another way that I found to really connect with law enforcement. When we ask for their perception of the community issues that they're dealing with, and show a genuine interest. I really like having face-to-face meetings. Sometimes it's by the phone, but you can really bond that way and find who you need to talk to about who's going to be dealing with the Safe Routes to School programs. PIOs, public information officers, are also really great. They have a lot of time usually to talk to you. And the other thing is staying connected. So yeah, you might have this great first meeting, but how do you stay connected? And one way that we do that is to actually give them opportunities to educate. And we really, it was sort of a surprise to me to find out that enforcement, law enforcement officers actually really do have a passion for education. A lot of them want to prevent these things from happening. They're eyes and ears on the street. They see all kinds of things happening, and they really want to help. So it's really nice that a lot of times they'll come to our workshops. We'll give them a few slides or give them time on the agenda to talk to the parents. And they really like when the parents are communicating with them, and it helps to bond. I'll stop there.
All right, thanks a lot, Marcy. So now we've heard 4 of the panelists share their responses to question 1. So I really appreciated those responses. And now is the opportunity for participants to ask any specific questions, either of the panel or of a specific panel member, or provide a brief comment. So my colleague Jane is going to unmute the lines, and we're going to have a few minutes to see if you all have anything to ask or to share.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
If you could please state your name and where you're from before you ask your question, that would be great. Does anybody have any? Hello? Does
I have
any
a
questions? Okay.
I have a question. This is Gwen Pro from Safe Routes to Schools in Marin County. First question for Marcy, who's working with law enforcement. I wanted to find out if you are, if there's any kind of conflict, or how do you resolve the conflict that might arise if you do not have the same methods or ideas on how to educate the public as your regular staff does?
So I'm sorry, I was unmuting part of your question, so I didn't actually hear. You're asking how do we resolve conflict with
the law enforcement if they may not share the same methodology, values, yes, ideas on what the education should be for your community?
Yeah, that's interesting. We have had a couple of conflicts. One was the law enforcement actually didn't agree with the Safe Routes to School program. They felt that the neighborhood was too dangerous, and they didn't really think it was a good idea to have kids walking out there or biking. So, you know, we basically understood, you know, because they were telling us that there are drug addicts in, you know, every corner, and, you know, so we were definitely wanted to hear them out and listen, and we wanted to, and then we took some time to tell them, well, that's exactly what we'd like to try to prevent and get kind of figure out a way around these problems. And so we discussed the workshop, so they did attend our workshop, and we gave them the floor, and we let them, you know, talk a little bit. Sometimes the law enforcement, when they have the floor, it becomes lecture time, you know, and that's okay, because at least they're being seen, and they, you know, as someone who cares, and it opens up that line of communication a lot of times for parents. We have had other conflicts where, you know, they might feel that you know, there are certain ways that they want to do things that is not usually our way, but it's kind of usually just a talk through. I really think that our job here is just to be a liaison between the police officers and the community. We've had some very positive interactions where the parents are actually really surprised that the police are so interested and show a genuine concern for, you know, rather than just always just wanting to ticket them and, you know, with citations. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marcy, and thanks, Gwen. Any other questions on this related to this specific question?
I have a question. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, hi. My name is Sophia, and I just had a question on how often do you feel is the most beneficial amount of, I guess, spacing with following up and staying up to date with all your contacts? Do you call every week or email every week, or, I mean, what do you guys find to be the most effective without being, I guess, inserting yourself too much into their everyday tasks?
Okay, great question. Any of the panelists want to respond to that?
This is Tamika, and I can start. I think this isn't going to be a satisfying answer, but I think it really depends. And I think that's part of building the relationship. And one of the things we always do when we're building relationships is one of our first, you know, we'll have a meeting, and then we'll always at the end say, when should we meet again? What feels right? And I think as you start to build that rapport and build that relationship, you get a sense. So we're in some coalitions where we meet weekly or biweekly, and we're in some coalitions where we have calls as needed. And so I think it really depends. Now, what I will say is sometimes I think you do have to push because you don't want to let too much time go by. And sometimes people are like, let's get to the as needed place where we have a call. And those partnerships where we do as needed are partnerships that have been around a little longer and where we have a lot of trust and when we're going to see each other a lot anyways. So I think you want that balance of making sure that you're staying in touch and seeing each other, but being full enough to know that from group to group, it's going to be different.
Okay, definitely. Thank you so much for that feedback.
Thanks, Tamika. Do any other of our panelists want to respond to Sophia's question?
This is Ryan Skagg. I'd just add, I think Tamika did a great job, but I'd just add it really depends on the deliverable that you're trying to get out the door and kind of what your timeline is. So, you know, some of our plans, like the RTP, we start outreach 2 years in advance, and we try to stay engaged with some partners on a more regular basis, and then others just kind of as needed. So I think it really depends on the deliverable.
Okay.
This is Meredith. I'll also just add, I think whatever and however much you decide is to actually follow through. So I think it's also okay to have an introductory meeting and say, you know, we don't have anything right now that we're working on, but let's just connect in a month or two just to check in. But I think it's just worthwhile being, you know, commit to having direct next steps and then actually committing to those. Because I do hear that, you know, if you're just building relationships, it's also a lot to do if you don't have deliverables to meet.
Okay, great. No, thank you. That really helps everyone.
Great. Marcy, did you have anything to add?
Not at this time.
Okay, great. Okay, we're going to need to move on to the next question. So we're going to go back into listen-only mode.
All participants are now in listen-only mode.
Okay, this is our second question. What is one example of a resource or tool that you have found beneficial in building relationships with agencies from other sectors? So all of the panelists have prepared a response to this question. So we're going to go ahead and start with Tamika, and then again we'll go to Meredith, Rye, and then Marcy. So take it away, Tamika.
So I think there's a ton of examples I have on this one, but the one I wanted to focus on was the Vision Zero network. And for folks who don't know, Vision Zero is this policy that started in Scandinavia, has made its way to the United States, and it's kind of going city by city. And in a particular city, a mayor will say, we're going to be a Vision Zero city. And then the goal is to get the number of traffic death and fatalities down to zero within 10 years. And so this is a policy that is great because it's for the first time acknowledging that traffic deaths are preventable, and it's also bringing in the intersections of multiple disciplines. And so often when a mayor says we're going to be a Vision Zero city, what he's also saying is that, or she is also saying is that we want multiple people from multiple sectors. So for instance, the City of LA's Vision Zero, you know, it's co-chaired by the police chief and by the general manager of the Department of Transportation. And the Department of Public Health is playing a big role, the Department of Public Works and Bureau of Street Services. And so it's really bringing together different folks at the table. And on our side as advocates, we're also involved in those conversations with the city, but we're also trying to work as advocates to make sure that the folks in the city are doing what we think they should do. And I think a tool for us that has been really helpful in that has been the Vision Zero Network. And the Vision Zero Network is an organization that was started by the former executive director of the San Francisco Bike Coalition. And it's essentially an organization that is kind of the national convener of different cities who are engaging in this Vision Zero work. And they do, you know, a monthly call for advocates. They do a monthly call for city officials. And the reason I think this is a tool, even if you're not in Vision Zero, that really I think works well is because it follows that philosophy that you're rarely inventing the wheel from scratch. And there are often other people doing that work. And so when we really struggle in LA to figure out how do we talk to the police department, about the fact that we don't want there to be any more deaths, but we also don't want to increase enforcement, particularly in low-income communities of color that are already potentially overly enforced. We can say, well, let's jump on this call and let's hear what advocates are doing in Boston, or let's hear what advocates are doing in New York or San Francisco. And so I think for me, this tool is more of an example that there are often people doing the work we want to do in other places. And I know that's sometimes hard for Californians to believe because we're exceptional and we think we invent everything here. But I think it's always important to first look and see who else is doing this and what can I learn from that. And that's important to do on that national stage, but also in the communities we want to work in. And I think that's how you prevent yourself from coming in as the savior who's going to fix everything and ignoring the general context that there's probably already people in the community who are doing the work. And so whether or not you're looking nationally or whether or not you're looking locally, it's the tool that says, I'm going to stop for a second and I'm going to figure out what coalitions or what organizations are already there, and I'm going to try to become a part of that and join those conversations and learn from them.
Thanks, Tamika. That was really great, very helpful. Okay, we're going to pass the floor over to Meredith for her response.
Great. Thanks, Mary. So a slightly different, and I don't know if this is necessarily a tool or just a strategy, but one thing that we always try to do at our Health and All Policies Task Force is really do our homework. And this plays out in a number of ways. So when we first started with the task force in 2010, we scheduled all these meetings. We're doing all this outreach, meeting with partners from all over, and we actually made kind of a big mistake, and we didn't check with our internal partners within the Department of Public Health first to see what types of work our internal partners already had and what type of relationships our partners already had with those external departments and agencies. And so we stepped on a lot of toes internally within the department, and it's nothing worse than going to a meeting with, Department of Transportation and them saying, like, yeah, we just met with your department yesterday, and to walk in a room and be like, oh, geez, it was a real missed opportunity. It makes us look silly, it makes our partners look silly, and it makes us look uncoordinated. So I think doing your homework just internally, and what's the historical relationship? Oftentimes there is some relationship, whether good or bad, and so knowing what a little bit of that history is, what were hot button issues that were challenges in the past, so that when you walk into the room, you can at least acknowledge what has happened before, and recognizing that we're not also doing this alone, kind of similar to Tamika's remaking the wheel. We're operating in systems that have existed for a long period of time. The other part of doing your homework is there's some really basic things that are available. Is read an organization or department's website. Did they just appoint a new director or new deputy director? Are they in transition? Are they in turmoil? Did a big scathing report just come out? I think knowing what's going on in kind of the larger context is also just really important to understanding both the individual and what they may be experiencing on a kind of professional, personal level, and what they may have their guard up against already, and just being aware of, I think, the larger context in which we operate. And then I think the last piece about doing your homework is in those actual meetings is really asking a lot of questions about what, and I mentioned this in the first question, is, what are your partner's priorities? You're not, if your priority, if it is Vision Zero or active transportation is our #1 priority, it doesn't mean that's necessarily their #1 priority, and oftentimes it's hard to get partners to focus on what you want them to focus on until they've met what their most immediate need is. So that's just a little bit about doing our homework, and again, it falls back on those trust, mutuality, and reciprocity principles.
Great. Terrific. Thanks so much, Meredith. Rai, would you like to add your thoughts?
Sure. We hold a lot of working groups at SCAG, and one of the things that I found really beneficial is that, not all of our stakeholders are kind of on the same page as maybe what a healthy community is or what the direction we want to go in is. So one of the things we try to do a lot is have outside stakeholders that we've kind of have an existing relationship with, that we've built that kind of trust, and we have that previous knowledge, and we're kind of on the same page on an issue, is have them present on an issue for us and really present so that it's not always SCAG speaking to people, so that our audience can see that there is a bigger kind of coalition and a bigger movement kind of behind the issue that we might be presenting. And I think that what this also does is it helps, kind of going back to our first question, is it also helps deepen that relationship, and it allows our partners to feel like we really value their expertise as well. So, and we recently had Meredith present at one of our working groups, and that's just kind of an example of that, and she did a great job. So, just kudos there. So, and that's it for me.
Thanks, Rye. Marcy, how about you? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, it's great to hear all the responses, and I love that, do your homework, because we've also made our mistakes and learned from them. Getting that idea of what's going on in your community is excellent. With regards to law enforcement, have really benefited from going to city council meetings, community meetings. A lot of times some of our other partners are having community action meetings, and the law enforcement are on the agenda every single time they have a meeting. So we know they're going to come to that meeting. We know that they're going to let us know what's going on the streets right now. What are some things, like you said, we've had to be surprised as well, and kind of act like you knew that all along. But it's something you want to. They feel like a lot more bonded with you if you're kind of feeling the same pains they are, or just understanding them. One thing that we do as well is keep a communication log. This is sort of a tool we use, because there's so much turnover within a lot of organizations, and especially law enforcement. People are being transferred around a lot, and so once we develop that relationship, it's really like, oh no, we have to develop that all over again. So something that we've found beneficial is to establish a monthly meeting or a monthly event where we may have the law enforcement actually come to our meetings. One thing we did recently, and this was not necessarily regarding law enforcement, but it can be integrated, we have something called our Safety Chaperone Program as part of our Safe Routes to School in a relatively high crime area of Eastside Riverside. And we have volunteers come, and they stand on the corner and kind of basically chaperone the kids walking to school, middle school and high school. This is something that's worked really well with that level, as opposed to with the elementary schools, the walking school buses. So, we were kind of seeing the volunteership sort of dwindle, and we thought, why don't we get somebody to be a guest chaperone? And so we asked the mayor, and the mayor was happy to put on a shirt, one of our T-shirts, and get out there on the corner and then hand out flyers and to recruit. And part of our idea for that is to have that be a monthly event. So we're going to be asking, maybe it's the coach of the high school or anyone else who'd like to be a guest chaperone. So we got some media out there, and we put that out on all of our social media as well. And we're hoping that can not just, of course, do what we wanted to do, which was recruit volunteers, but also get that that bonding with the community and those partners. Another tool that just suggesting for people to use, that something surprised me when I called some of the police officers, well, actually the city departments, we're county, so we had to kind of accumulate a lot of this data, was to ask about their UCR FBI tool. It's the Uniform Crime Reporting Tool. And this is something they use all the time. And if you wanted to know maybe the situation in certain areas, what the crime looks like, you can get that from the department. You can actually look it up on that tool, but I find it really beneficial to call them, because they have someone who kind of is in charge of that, and they can fill in the blanks and kind of help you more understand the data. So a couple of tools I found helpful.
Okay. Thanks, Marcy. Okay, so now is an opportunity for folks listening in to ask a question of a specific panel member or pose a question to the whole panel. We're going to go ahead and unmute the lines to open that up. Please keep your, if you do want to make a comment, please try to keep it fairly brief, and we'll see what you all have to say.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
Are there any questions from the participants?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Lorenzo Gonzalez, and I'm from Community Health Councils here in Los Angeles. And my question is, on the tools you all commented, is there anything in particular that would be different for the private sector?
Great question. Any of the panelists have a comment for Lorenzo?
This is Meredith. I will say the very short answer is no. They're pretty much all the same. I think recognizing and acknowledging culture and language differences is the one thing I'd reiterate. Similar between government agencies, there's different culture and language. Between government and private, there's also culture and language differences.
This is Tamika. I would just say ditto. I think it's a different sandbox, but I think the same rules apply.
Great. Thanks, panelists. I appreciate that. Participants, any other questions or comments on this particular question?
Yeah, this is Anthony Taylor from Sonoma County.
Okay.
So this is regarding the uniform crime reporting tool. I'm just wondering how you've seen it via, I forgot who it was who mentioned it, but how you've seen it used to advance safe routes to school or even active transportation.
Yes, and this is Marcy. I was the one who mentioned the UCR FBI tool. Actually, we used it to gather data to submit for the Cycle 2 ATP project. And we used it to show need in the community. It was specifically answering one of the questions. It wasn't for disadvantaged communities, but it helped to kind of paint the picture of our community and what kinds of issues they were dealing with. So to us, it sort of did kind of help with that to show that it was a disadvantaged community, and the fact that they're dealing with crime. And just living with that perception of crime that could happen is very stressful on a community.
Thanks, Marcy. Appreciate that. So we're going to need to move on to the next question. We've got 5 questions left, and we've already used up a little over half of our time. So just want to recommend that panelists and participants try to keep in mind our short time frame in your responses or questions. We appreciate it, and it's really exciting to hear this dialogue. So we're just going to plow forward now with putting you back in listen-only mode, and then I'll ask the third question.
All participants are now in listen-only mode.
So here's question number 3. I am from the health/education sector. If I want to work with someone in planning or with others that make decisions about infrastructure, who do I need to contact? Who is interested and has cross-sector partnerships in their job description, either formally or informally? So we're going to go ahead and have Rai respond to this question, and then Marcy. Thanks.
Great, thanks. This is another one of those questions that really depends on the size of the jurisdiction that you're working with. So our region, we have very small cities all the way up to the city of Los Angeles. So if you're working with a smaller city, there may be only one planner in the community development department, or there may be only a couple of engineers in the public works department to work with. So you may be able to figure out who that person is relatively quickly. In a larger city, you may actually need to work with multiple departments such as public works, parks, et cetera. I would say that generally you'll find your best allies kind of in the community development side of things, or if there's, or possibly even in the Parks Department, you might find a champion. Public Works, I think it's moving in that direction. Traditionally, they've been a little bit slower on the uptake, as many of you I'm sure know about some of the more the newer active transportation types of projects. But I think with education and building those relationships that we've been talking about, that's definitely doable too. And then you may also find people in the police department that are helpful if you're looking more on the infrastructure or the enforcement or educational side of things. So that would be my initial kind of place to start.
Okay, thanks, Rye. Marcy, would you like to tack on a brief comment?
Sure. Definitely everything that Rye said is my experience as well. I think if you wanted a starting place, maybe the city manager's office, they may know if there are groups going on, such as a Healthy City Initiative, or we have, for instance, Live Well Paris. So there's a lot of times those kinds of groups have started, and that's where you might connect with these champions. And one thing that happened recently, which I kind of appreciated, we were having a workshop, and the engineers actually wanted to share they're actually updating their master plan, so or their Safe Routes to School plan. So if they're also needing something from you, if you've already convened a group and they kind of need to connect with some parents or some community members, then this may be a good kind of quid pro quo for that to happen. Another thing I was talking about is the local, I was talking to our planner who we have here on board with the Public Health Department, and he was saying that the local American Planning Association section, there's 8 in the state. So it's membership driven, but maybe they can connect you with a planner that's working on healthy communities planning. A lot of now the American Planning Association is focusing a lot more on creating that capacity between public health and planning. So they are encouraging that involvement from public health. The APA actually has a CDC grant at this time where they're encouraging involvement from public health. So, and I encourage you to go ahead and email me or call me after this call, and I can connect you with our planner.
Thanks, Marcy. Very helpful. Meredith has something to add.
Yeah, just real quickly, the other potential resource is to call the Caltrans district office. So there's 12 different district offices in California for Caltrans, and they work oftentimes directly with the city and county planning and transportation departments, whatever level they are, and they will be able to, they may, I won't say they will, they may be able to connect you with who is either submitting applications for active transportation. So that may be just another connection point. And as I think Ryan mentioned, similarly, not all cities and counties are equal, neither are all districts, and so some you may find more helpful than others.
Thanks, Meredith. Okay, we're going to open up the phone lines again to see if any of you have a specific question or comment about question number 3. So we're going to open up the phone lines, and again, please state your name and where you're from, and we'll go from there.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
Hello, this is Ken Ryan in Mount Shasta. I'd like to reverse this question. Who within a complex health department, I guess on a county level, how would we find a person or solicit a person who might be interested in this question of exercise and walking and biking in relation to health?
I'll jump in and answer. This is Meredith. I think that's a great question, and I will point actually to, well, you can't see me pointing, but our colleagues in the room here at the California Department of Public Health, the Active Transportation Safety Program is actually a great resource. They have connections in all the local health departments, and they can help you start to narrow down at least who might be the right contact. And then if you are reaching directly out to your local health department, a lot of times folks that work in active transportation would be found in the chronic disease prevention branch, sometimes nutrition, education, obesity prevention, safety and injury control is another likely place. But you are right, and there may not be one person whose job it is to do active transportation. It may be, 5 people who have little bits of their job. So it can be challenging, and similar to others, there's turnover. So it's always a changing field.
Yes, I think what we've found is that it's a case, in rural areas at the very least, which is what I'm talking about, Siskiyou County, it really is a key to finding a person who's thought about this and cares about it, because obviously it's an add-on to somebody's other activities, and we find it's a difficult issue to find someone who says, oh yeah, that makes sense, and we'll do some time, put a little time into working with you to make something happen. So if there were some kind of a format through the health community in California that would allow us to put out I don't know, a request or a sort of a sign-up sheet, do you have an interest in this, that we could ask our health departments to circulate among their staff, maybe that would be one way of finding someone who had an interest and was willing to devote a little time to this.
Yeah, this is Meredith again. I think we should definitely follow up offline and strategize about other ways, because I think you're absolutely right. Especially the rural counties, we're dealing with local health departments who have very reduced staff oftentimes, and so it can be really challenging. So let's definitely check in offline. But the other thing I would add is there are also a lot of nonprofits and community organizations that when the health department is not the lead, that they oftentimes can step in and be the lead. So, I mean, Safe Routes to Schools National Partnership do work all over the state and country, and there's a number of other organizations that do that work. So let's definitely connect offline and we can chat more.
Okay, I'll chat more with you. Just to add to your thought, yes, I agree there are other organizations, but there's nothing that has the influence in thinking on people without a letter on letterhead that says our health department is into this.
Did he respond?
So thank you. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, thanks, Ken, for that question. Any other quick questions from the field or comments? Okay, thanks for that. We're going to move on to question 4, moving right along here. So we're going to put you back into listen-only mode.
All participants are now in listen-only mode.
Okay, here's question 4. What are the mechanisms for cross-sector collaboration? In my field of health, we gather as a collaborative or a coalition and have work group meetings. Is this how collaboration is done in other sectors, or are there other tools or mechanisms that are used to collaborate? So we're going to have Tamika, Meredith, and Marcy respond to this question. And just a friendly reminder to our panelists to please keep your comments brief, as we're kind of getting close to the end of our teleconference time. So thank you. Tamika?
Great. So I'll keep it short. Yes, this is common in the transportation world. I think there are, very similar to the public health world, a lot of collaboratives and coalitions, but I think something that's also similar to public health, but I think public health does a little bit better of a job, is that in the transportation world, sometimes we really stay in a transportation silo. And so I think there are new, I think as the field matures, the idea is to try to make more collaborations and coalitions that are cross-sector, and whether or not that's private, nonprofit, or transportation and public health, or transportation and housing. Those things are happening more and more, but it's super, super common. A majority of my schedule in any given week is going to coalition meetings, so I'll stop there.
Thanks, Tamika. Now Meredith has something to add.
Thanks. I'll also keep mine really brief. I think, Tamika, it's very similar in government. I actually spend most of my time in meetings with our partners. And I would just say, one difference that I've observed from doing this work is that public health, and maybe this is more, and I think this is general public health, is that we tend to be a little bit more process-oriented, and we build in a lot more time for process, and that's not always the case in other fields. And so that's been kind of one of those culture differences that we've had to learn. And what it means, what outcomes mean are also different. So oftentimes I think in public health we talk about process outcomes, which given we sometimes can't measure our other outcomes, process is kind of the proxy. So I think it is important I guess, again, going back to that language and culture difference. And I would just say as a two last little tidbits is don't be afraid to ask, the question, like, what do you mean when you say X? Because I found that, technical assistance actually means slightly different things in transportation speak versus public health speak. And so getting clear on what you both are talking about, even if we use the same words, sometimes we mean different things. And then just the last comment is that, and I'm happy to follow up afterwards, but Health and Law Policies, just a plug, is a great mechanism for collaboration. It brings together across, non-public health sectors and actually works to create that common platform and work collaboratively.
Okay, thanks, Meredith. Marcy, anything to add?
Yes, just that I wanted to share that we, in Riverside County, did develop a active transportation network, which was modeled after San Bernardino's group that I'd be happy to share. And basically this gets engineers and other stakeholders in one room. It is very well attended. I think engineers are very attracted to the meeting because we always have a SCAG update, Southern California Association of Governments, MPO update. We have our Regional Transportation Commission updates. So they want to stay connected, and a lot of times we have to push them out of the room. We have to leave, and they're really engaged, and it's really nice to get that cross sector. We have a lot of our nonprofits attend the meetings. We even have our waste management come because they're going to be recycling bikes, and it gets really a lot of those connections going and quarterly meetings.
Terrific. Thanks, Marcy. Appreciate all those responses, and hopefully they're helpful to you out there listening. So that was question 4, and we're going to see if any of our participants want to ask a panel member a specific question or pose a question to the whole panel or make a brief comment. So we're going to unmute the lines now.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
Okay, if there's any questions, please speak up. And anybody? Okay, we're going to move on then to question 5. So let's put her back in listen-only mode, and we'll go.
All participants are now in listen-only mode.
So here's the next question. I work with 5th and 6th grade youth in low-income schools whose families are very vulnerable and may not speak English. They may be fearful of speaking out. Are there mechanisms in the planning process for hearing their voices? How can someone who works closely with these families and their schools from the health and education sectors partner with other sectors to amplify those voices? So great question. I think Tamika is going to respond.
Yes. And so, for us, we're doing this all the time. And one of the best things we've done is our Active Streets LA work. And it's something you can find on our website at la-bike.org. And we work with a local organization that's fantastic in South LA called Trust South LA. And basically, when we're doing work in these communities, we've developed a deck of flashcards that explain different transportation infrastructure things. What is a curb? What is a speed bump? You know, what do these different things do? And we do community events where we go one weekend and we do a community walk or we do a community bike ride, and oftentimes we do both. With folks in the community, we stop, we get feedback, we come back, and we talk about what we saw. We come back a second weekend, we do it again with folks who didn't come last time, or with folks who might have brought new friends, look at the flashcards again, and then look at a map and say, you know, what would we want to do here, what would we want to do there? And the great thing is we also invite folks from the city to come, so folks from the Department of Transportation, folks from Bureau of Street Services, so that they're seeing firsthand some of the barriers community members face, and they're hearing it directly from those folks' mouths. And I think, you know, the answer to the larger question is, why does this work? Because we're treating the folks in the community as experts. And we're not treating them as if they're just a box we're checking off. And I think so often as advocates, we say we want to empower communities. We want to empower communities. And the reality is the power's already in those communities. So we try to say we're co-powering. We're working together with them because they already have the power, and how do we treat and respect them as the experts that they are? And, you know, for these events, we always have a barbecue and we provide food and we give away free bikes, but are we compensating them? Are we making it convenient for them? And are we trusting them? And then the last piece I would say is that it's really, really important that if you want to work with these communities, that the work you're doing is linguistically appropriate, which I think a lot of people think about. Do we have the right translators? But are the materials translated? If you're going to direct them to a website, if you're going to direct them to a phone number, are there folks who can talk to them in a linguistically appropriate way? And I think a lot of folks think about that, not as many as they should, but a lot of folks do. But the second part of that is it culturally competent? Because you can speak a language but still not understand the culture, still not understand the customs. And so it's important to both be linguistically appropriate but also culturally competent. And because we're short on time, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tamika. Really appreciate that. Great comments. Okay, I'm thinking maybe there's somebody listening in that would like to ask a follow-up question for Tamika or make a comment on this particular question. So we're going to unmute.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
Hi, this is Shannon. I'm from San Luis Obispo County. Thanks for that answer. I was wondering, I missed the website that you referenced, and are the deck of flashcards on there or other materials that you discussed?
The deck of flashcards should be on there, but it might also, we're actually doing a transition of our website, so it might be easiest to just shoot me an email directly, and I'm happy to share that information with folks.
Great. And are they just in English?
English and Spanish.
Okay, great.
And Shannon, this is Mary. We will send out contact information for all the panelists with the evaluation link, survey link, okay?
Great. And sorry, what was the website?
la-bike.org, and the name of the program is Active Streets LA.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the participants on this question? Okay, great. We're going to move on to question 6 then. So we're going to put the phone back in listen-only mode.
All participants are now in listen-only mode.
Okay, here's question 6. I work in a county that has received transportation infrastructure funds, not education funds. What are some innovative ways to partner with other sectors when there is no transportation funding devoted to working with communities? Another excellent question. We have Tamika and Rai prepared to respond. So go ahead, Tamika.
Sure. So I think that's a really good question, and I think that's something that all of us in the transportation world really, really struggle with. I think one of the ways we try to overcome this is we try to advocate for there to be more non-infrastructure funding. So we go to our, MTA, we go to our city government, and we try to always constantly say, are you including education? Are you including encouragement? I think we also look to foundations. I think foundations may not be as into, a new bike lane and really can't fund us to necessarily do that work, but I think they get community engagement and community outreach. And I think in the transportation world, there hasn't always been community engagement and community outreach in really authentic ways. So if you can make that pitch to a foundation that gets organizing, I think that's helpful. And then the active transportation pot of money at the state level, ATP, it's something that does sometimes fund non-infrastructure projects. We worked with the LA Unified School District on a project that is about teaching bicycle education to 30 high-need middle schools across LAUSD. And I think it's difficult, right, because ATP isn't used to having non-infrastructure projects, so even the hoops we have to go through to actually get the project off the ground are tough. But I do think that it's looking for those non-traditional venues and then using policies that are more intersectional. So in transportation, Vision Zero, I think is really one of those chances where you're going to be able to do so much more because education is really one of the key ways that you're going to make behavior change. And so I think thinking about things from that point of view, either from a Vision Zero point of view or from a public health point of view, or from a gentrification and displacement point of view, but framing our work a little differently can speak to some funding sources that traditionally may not have funded transportation. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tamika. Rai, any additional thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would try to look sometimes beyond the transportation realm as well. I think some of our public health departments have actually been great resources for getting these types of projects started. So Marcy has a lot of experience with this in Riverside, but also, the health department down in San Diego used actually prevention dollars to encourage active transportation planning and then eventually some non-infrastructure work down there. So I think that if you can work with the public health department, they may be able to access additional pots of money for some of this programmatic work. Additionally, in addition to the state pot of ATP funding, some of that comes down to the MPOs like SCAG, and we sometimes host our own call for projects. And so you want to make sure that you're getting your voice heard there to make sure that a portion of that is being set aside for non-infrastructure. What we are trying to do at SCAG now is try to really take the burden off some of the cities going through that arduous process of getting all the funding allocated from the state, because some of it's federal and it is a time-consuming process. So we're actually doing a lot of that process on behalf of our locals to try to make it easier for them to access that money for non-infrastructure projects. So that's where I would tell you to start.
Thanks, Rai. Meredith has a thought to add.
And I'm saying this wearing my health and all policies hat, I will just say that the state level active transportation program, non-infrastructure, is oftentimes talked about, but I don't think we hear enough, and this California Transportation Commission, who are the ones actually making decisions, I don't think hear enough from those folks implementing non-infrastructure. And I think there's a real education need for those members of the CTC to actually hear from people on the ground doing this work, what this type of work really is and does. I don't think they understand it, and so therefore they have not prioritized it as much as I think they could and should. So I would encourage each and every one of you in your capacity to reach out to the commission and make a pitch for why non-infrastructure is important, why plans are important. I think there's some perceptions that need to be, some education work at the state level that could benefit everybody at the local.
Great, thanks for adding that, Meredith. So,
Mary, I have another comment as well. This is Marcy.
Okay.
Real quickly, we had a school district in Riverside County that was very, very motivated to do Safe Routes to School programming, and they were very successful with no funding whatsoever. And they did so much. They were the principal of one school who later became district level, was really the spearhead in all of this, but he utilized every single resource there was, including us. So even though we weren't specifically funded as public health for his area, we of course, tried to leverage as much as possible because that's something they wanted. So I think it's really important to know that, these things can happen, these sort of efforts can happen even without funding if there's real passion for it. And then later on, by the way, they did get funded because they had already started so many things, and it was just kind of an easy application.
Great, thanks. Thanks a lot to all the panelists. So I think in the interest of time, we're just going to move on to question 7, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the very end for any random, impromptu participant questions. So here we go for question 7. If you had to start partnership building all over again, what would you do the same and what would you do differently? So all panelists have prepared a short response to this great question. So we're going to again start with Tamika.
Great. I think a lot of the things I would do exactly the same as I started off talking about. I think those things continue to remain important. Show up, be consistent, be an ally, and build trust. I think one of the things I would do differently, and I talked a little bit about this before, but I would spend more time on learning the history and learning the landscape. I think so often we see a problem and we want to fix it and we just want to jump right in, that we ignore the expertise and we ignore the time and the investment that have already been made by so many people. And so I think sometimes our desire to do the right thing, it's totally motivated from the right place, but I think we overlook some important work already happening. So I would just spend more time just doing that fact-finding history lesson.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tamika. Meredith?
Similarly, I think we would do a lot of things very much the same. And I mentioned this early, but I think acknowledging when you make a mistake and owning that mistake and apologizing for it goes a really, really long way because you will make mistakes, you will step on toes, you will say the wrong things. So I think just that humility piece, owning up to it is a really important thing. And then I think the last thing I'll say is, and this has been emphasized by everybody, but relationship building takes time. And really, the more you can invest up front in that relationship, I think it pays off really in the end when you have that fire that needs to be put out and you can call that person 5 o'clock on a Friday and say, I need your help. And, so paying it forward, I think, pays off in the end.
Great. Paying it forward makes a lot of sense. Rai, any thoughts?
I'd echo a lot of what's already been said. I think the more kind of prep work, planning you can do, even a lot of like one-on-one meetings with coalition members, either in between or leading up to coalition meetings to kind of prep them on what some of the thoughts are for the meeting so that people can come prepared is super helpful. Strategic planning and incorporating your partners into that process can also be helpful in terms of making sure that your mission and vision kind of line up with the direction that you want partners to go. So those are things that, I wish I had time to do more of, that I feel like we don't always do well just due to lack of resources and time to do it. But I think one of the things that we do well sometimes is provide kind of discrete tasks or deliverables that we want input on, and I think that sometimes that can be helpful to kind of guide the conversation and so that everyone knows kind of the direction that you're heading in. So, thanks.
Thank you, Rai. Appreciate that. Marcy, anything you'd like to add to the conversation?
Sure. Yes, so I think some of the things that we've learned that each community has its unique characteristics, and there's no real cookie-cutter way to connect or collaborate. It's always interesting. We have these 4 projects, and we've been doing this for 7 years now. How we always kind of go in thinking we are going to be flexible and that we need to hear everybody and find out who are the partners here. And it's always different. It's always a challenge, and surprises, are always there. So it's really, that's something that we've learned along the way. With regards to law enforcement, I think that understanding that officers, most of them, are in this because they really wanted to make a positive change in the world, and understand that they, don't assume that they're not interested in helping or that they're too busy for community education. That's one thing that I may have done where I figured, well, they're too busy or they have other priorities, but a lot of times they really do want to be a part of these efforts. And but understanding that they do have their priorities and they could have to leave a meeting in a minute if there's an emergency. So I also thought of another thing that we'd like to do is ask for a ride along, because you can also do that. You can ride along with some of the officers and see what things look like from their perspective. So that's kind of eye-opening at times and definitely bonding experience.
Thanks very much. Those are great responses. So we have 8 minutes left, and what I think we'll do now is we're going to unmute the phone line, and we're going to see what kinds of questions or comments the field has, whether it's on a specific question that we've covered so far today, or if it's something else that relates to multi-sector partnering that you would like to ask a specific panel member or pose to the panel as a whole. So we're going to go ahead and unmute the lines and see what kinds of things you guys have to say.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
Okay, this is Ken Ryan again. I'd like to comment, especially to the younger people who are getting involved in this, that the electronic media is not a substitute for one-on-one connection, especially when you're building relationships. I think you should be considering as many face-to-face as you can when you meet new individuals. After that, then once everybody builds trust, then electronic media is an excellent communication tool, but I wouldn't count on it for building the initial contacts. And I'm afraid of that in some ways electronic media is building distance as opposed to building connection. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I know that Meredith would like to respond to that, and maybe one of the other panelists as well.
I think, Ken, that's a great point. I think even so often we go straight to an email, and picking up the phone and actually calling somebody is also just a great way to build those relationships, and gives you a chance to check in with somebody you may not have talked with recently.
Yeah. Thank you. Other questions from the field that relate to multi-sector partnering?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dolly from Santa Rosa, California.
Okay. What's your name again? What's your name again?
Amy
I'm sorry.
Jolly.
Okay.
Amy Jolly. Am I coming through?
Yes.
Okay. So I actually have two questions. One is for the person who commented about ride-alongs, and I run a high school program. I'm wondering if anyone has any experience or thoughts on building relationships between student leaders and law enforcement and having students do ride-alongs. So that's one question. And then I had another question too, which is people keep talking about like taking time to build trust or addressing the issues that are kind of key concerns for communities. And I'm wondering about kind of the way that organizations have balanced themselves between like funders' deliverables and mandates from funders and the flexibility kind of necessary to create a positive landscape or to learn the landscape and to build that kind of community and trust in the school environment.
Okay, Amy, thanks for those two questions. We'll see if any of the panelists have a quick response to. The first one was about student leaders and law enforcement ride-alongs. Maybe Marcy has a thought on that?
Thank you. I'm not sure about that. Since they are minors, I would think that there'd need to be permission slips or some kind of thing like that, but certainly wouldn't, I would think that you could just call and find out about that.
Okay.
And the second part of Amy's question has to do with the investment in building trust through time and flexibility and creating a positive landscape. Those are some of the things that I heard. Any thoughts from the panelists on that?
This is Tamika. I think that's something you have to start from the application process. I think so often we want to be competitive in the grants we're applying for that we set up unreasonable expectations for ourselves. And I think that you have to really be intentional about what you're saying you're going to do and be able to deliver. And I think that means you also have to develop relationships with funders where you can have honest conversations with them about some of the challenges you're facing, about why it's taking a while. And most sophisticated funders understand if you're just transparent and having dialogue throughout.
This is Meredith. I will just add writing into your grant applications to those funders, the number of meetings that you have as a deliverable with stakeholders, the number of either individual meetings or individuals that you're working with. I think building that in as a deliverable is also a nice way.
Okay, great, thanks. Great responses, and again, great questions. Other questions from the field?
This is Lindell Price. I'm in El Dorado County, and I volunteer with our Commission on Aging. And my question is, how can we overcome the frequent assumption that active transportation equals recreation to include a focus on utilitarian active transportation, such as pedestrian connections to transit, trips that are incorporated into daily life?
This is Rye with SCAG. I would say start with some of the data from probably the California Household Travel Survey. I'm not sure what it's like for your region, but I mean, when we look at that data, the vast majority of walking and biking trips are for utilitarian purposes, and very little of it is actually for recreation that's reported in that. So that's what we kind of use as the foundation, because we get that question a lot from some of our elected officials. So that's what we try to show them, and then we've also tried to do some analysis on the benefits from a utilitarian side in terms of the cost savings and around health, and also from kind of a personal spending on transportation side of things. So.
Okay, thanks, Rye. And Lindell, great question. I want to say real quick that we've run out of time, so we're going to briefly wrap up and say thanks to all the panelists for their expertise and their time today. It's been fantastic. Thanks to all of you participants who teamed up to make this teleconference beneficial and successful. As a reminder, a recording of this call will be posted on the ATRC website. We encourage ongoing discussion and exploration of the important topic of multi-sector partner engagement in active transportation. Please keep in mind that your ATRC regional coordinators are here to help you if you have partnership challenges or relationship building ideas that you want to bounce off of us. We are planning several ATRC trainings on the following topics in the near future. So just a little bit of promotion here. April 26th at 10 a.m., we have a webinar on walking school bus implementation. And in May, date to be decided, we have a webinar on safe routes to school evaluation resources and best practices. And then in June, date pending, we have another teleconference planned focusing on how MPOs are supporting active transportation non-infrastructure efforts. So we've got lots of great stuff ahead. Thanks again for your participation. We're now adjourned. So take care, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week.